Cold Sterile CEO demands divorce in the house, telling wife, "You can't afford a lawyer to fight." The rain outside grew heavier, matching the storm building in her chest. This house wasn't just brick and mortar to her. It was every weekend spent picking out paint colors, every holiday dinner she'd hosted for his colleagues. Every quiet morning she'd watch him read the financial section while she made coffee just the way he liked it. Have you ever felt powerless in your own home? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. She built him an empire with her silence, and he repaid her by signing papers to demolish everything she called home. The divorce papers hit the marble counter with a sound that echoed through their Buckhead mansion like a gunshot. Danielle's hands trembled as she stared at the legal documents, rain streaking the floor-to-ceiling windows behind her. 15 years of marriage reduced to terms and conditions, assets and debts, cold legal language that couldn't capture the warmth she'd poured into building their life together. "You can't afford a lawyer to fight me," Richard said, his voice carrying that familiar edge of control that once made her feel protected but now felt like a knife against her throat. He stood across their kitchen island in his $1,000 suit, checking his Rolex as if her world falling apart was just another appointment on his schedule. What happens when 15 years of loyalty gets reduced to legal documents? Have you ever given everything to someone who saw it as weakness? Danielle had met Richard when she was 28, working double shifts as a nurse in Atlanta's busiest emergency room. He was 35 then, already climbing the corporate ladder with ruthless determination. She'd been drawn to his confidence, the way he took charge of every situation. Back then, his need to control felt like protection. Now it felt like a prison with golden bars. "The house goes on the market Monday," he continued, straightening his tie. "You'll have 30 days to find somewhere else to live. I'm being generous." The charity gala photos from last weekend still sat on the counter. Images of them smiling for cameras, her hand on his arm, the perfect couple everyone envied. The photographer had captured her laughing at something he whispered in her ear. She couldn't remember what he'd said, but she remembered the lie of it all. Even then, these papers were already printed, already signed on his end. "Richard, we can work this out," she whispered, her nursing instincts kicking in, the same voice she used to calm frightened patients in the ER. "Couples therapy, counseling, something. This doesn't have to. Save it, Danielle." He grabbed his keys from the granite countertop. "I've already moved into the downtown penthouse. My lawyer will contact you about the details." The rain outside grew heavier, matching the storm building in her chest. This house wasn't just brick and mortar to her. It was every weekend spent picking out paint colors, every holiday dinner she'd hosted for his colleagues. Every quiet morning, she'd watched him read the financial section while she made coffee just the way he liked it. Have you ever felt powerless in your own home? This story will shake you if you have. Stay with me. She thought about their early days, when his hands were gentle instead of dismissive, when he'd pull her close after her long shifts at the hospital, when making love felt like coming home instead of fulfilling an obligation. Now those same hands that once traced her skin with reverence were signing papers to erase her from his life. "I gave you everything," she said to his retreating form. "My career, my dreams, my family's trust fund that helped you start your first company. Everything." He paused at the doorway, and for a moment she thought she saw something flicker across his face. Regret, maybe, or the ghost of the man she'd fallen in love with. But when he turned back, his eyes were cold as January rain. "That was your choice. Don't make it my problem." The door slammed behind him, leaving her alone with the sound of rain and the echo of 15 years crashing down around her. She sank onto one of the bar stools they'd picked out together, her reflection staring back from the dark windows. A 43-year-old woman who'd given up her nursing career to be the perfect wife, now facing a future she'd never planned for. But as rain streaked the windows, Danielle's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I saw the news. We need to talk." Someone who remembers Detroit. Her blood ran cold. Nobody was supposed to know about Detroit. The past has a way of finding you when you think you've buried it deep enough, especially when it involves the children you abandoned. Danielle stared at her phone screen until the words blurred. Detroit. Nobody talked about Detroit. Richard had made that clear 15 years ago when they'd moved to Atlanta. His past in Cleveland and Detroit was irrelevant to their future together. She'd accepted it the same way she'd accepted everything else about him, filing away her curiosity like a good wife should. But now, sitting in the wreckage of her marriage, those buried questions clawed their way to the surface. What would you do if you discovered your spouse had been living a lie for decades? Have you ever found out someone you trusted had secrets that changed everything? The next morning, while Richard was presumably enjoying his newfound freedom in his downtown penthouse, Danielle did something she'd never done in 15 years of marriage. She went through his personal things. The home office he'd always kept locked was suddenly accessible. He'd been in such a hurry to leave. He'd forgotten to take the spare key from her jewelry box. Her hand shook as she rifled through filing cabinets and desk drawers, looking for anything that mentioned Detroit. Most of it was business documents, tax papers, investment portfolios. But tucked behind a folder of insurance policies, she found a manila envelope that made her heart stop. Letters, dozens of them, all addressed to Richard Cole, all from the same return address in Detroit, all unopened. The postmarks went back 20 years. 20 years of letters he'd never opened, from someone named Sarah Brooks. The handwriting on the envelopes grew more desperate over time, from neat cursive to angry scrawl. The last one was dated just 6 months ago. Danielle's hands trembled as she opened the most recent letter. The words hit her like a physical blow. Your daughter graduated law school. Top of her class. Maya Colbrooks. She kept both our names because I wanted her to know where she came from, even if her father didn't care. She's going to be a civil rights lawyer. She's everything good that you could never be. This is the last letter I'll write. Sarah, a daughter. Richard had a daughter he'd never mentioned, never acknowledged, never supported. While Danielle had spent years hoping for children, while they'd gone through fertility treatments and heartbreak, he'd already had a child he'd walked away from. The confrontation that night was explosive. Richard came home to pick up more of his things and found her sitting in his office chair. The letters spread across his desk like evidence in a courtroom. You want to explain these? She demanded, holding up Sarah's final letter. His face went white, then red with fury. You had no right. I had every right. She stood up, 15 years of suppressed anger finally finding its voice. We tried for babies, Richard, for years. I blamed myself. Went through every test, every procedure, while you sat there knowing you already had a child. That was different. He moved toward her, and for a moment she remembered the passion that had once existed between them. The way he'd pin her against walls when they fought, how anger and desire used to tangle together in their younger years. Now, there was only rage. Different how? Because you were younger? Because she wasn't the right kind of woman? Because walking away was easier than being responsible. Maya isn't my daughter, he said through gritted teeth, but his eyes told a different story. Maya Colbrooks, Danielle repeated. She kept your name, Richard, even when you never gave her anything else. That night, she lay awake in their king-sized bed, soon to be just her bed for 30 more days, and stared at the ceiling. Richard's betrayal went deeper than divorce papers and hidden assets. He'd let her believe she was broken, that her body was the problem, while knowing he'd already fathered a child he'd abandoned. But the next morning brought something that would change everything. The law firm letterhead made Danielle's blood run cold. Brooks and Associates Civil Rights Foundation. The same last name wasn't coincidence. It was destiny calling. 20 years ago, he walked away from responsibility. Today, that responsibility walked into a Charleston courtroom wearing a lawyer's robe and carrying his wife's case. Maya Colbrooks was nothing like Danielle had imagined. At 28, she carried herself with a confidence that Richard would have recognized if he'd ever bothered to meet her. Tall and sharp-eyed, with her father's stubborn jawline and her mother's fierce intelligence, she sat across from Danielle in a downtown Atlanta coffee shop, her law degree and righteous anger making her seem older than her years. I saw the divorce filing in the business section, Maya said, stirring her coffee with mechanical precision. Coal Industries CEO files for divorce. Big news in financial circles. Her voice carried no emotion, but Danielle caught the slight tremor in her hands. "I've been tracking his life for years. You're his daughter." The words felt strange in Danielle's mouth, acknowledging a family member she'd never known existed. Biologically, yes. In every way that matters, no. Maya's eyes were hard as steel. "He walked away when I was 8 months old. Never sent a dime in child support. Never called, never visited. My mother worked 3 jobs to put herself through nursing school, then worked her way through law school at night so she could fight for women like herself." The irony wasn't lost on Danielle. While she'd given up her nursing career to support Richard's dreams, his first woman had used her nursing career to fuel her own. Have you ever met someone who was shaped by your spouse's cruelty before you even knew them? Maya was living proof of Richard's pattern of abandonment, and Danielle was just the latest victim in a decades-long cycle. "Why do you want to help me?" Danielle asked. "You don't know me." Maya leaned forward, and for a moment Danielle saw something vulnerable flicker across her face. "Because he's doing to you what he did to my mother. The financial control, the isolation, the way he makes you feel like you're nothing without him. My mother kept all his letters, the ones where he promised to marry her, to take care of us, right up until the day he decided we were inconvenient. I never got pregnant," Danielle whispered. "We tried for years. He probably made sure you wouldn't," Maya said bitterly. "Can't abandon children you don't have." But he couldn't resist the control that comes with you wanting them. The conversation that followed revealed the depth of Richard's deception. Maya had been researching him since law school, building a case not just against his personal behavior, but his business practices. The abandoned daughter had grown up to become exactly the kind of lawyer that powerful men like Richard feared most. One with nothing to lose and everything to prove. "I don't just want to help you get a fair divorce settlement," Maya said, sliding a business card across the table. "I want to expose his pattern. The financial abuse, the emotional manipulation, the way he uses his wealth to silence women who threaten his image." But as they talked, Danielle began to suspect Maya's motivations ran deeper than professional ethics. There was something personal in the way she spoke about Richard, something that went beyond the standard father abandonment story. "There's something else," Maya said finally. "Something about your marriage that connects to more than just my mother." She opened her briefcase and pulled out a file that made Danielle's stomach drop. "There are 3 other women, Mrs. Cole. 3 other families he walked away from. Are you ready to meet them?" The coffee shop suddenly felt too small, too warm. Danielle stared at the file, knowing that opening it would change everything. But after 15 years of living Richard's version of truth, she was ready for the real story, no matter how ugly it might be. "Show me," she said. Maya smiled for the first time since they'd met, and Danielle caught a glimpse of what this young woman might have been like if she'd grown up with a father who loved her instead of abandoned her. "Mrs. Cole," Maya said, "you're about to discover you were never alone in this. And together, we're going to make sure he never does this to another woman again." As they left the coffee shop, Danielle felt something she hadn't experienced in years, hope mixed with purpose. But she also felt the first stirrings of something that would prove more dangerous than Richard's lawyers or his money. The desire for justice that burns in women who've been underestimated for too long. She thought she was his only victim until she walked into a room full of women who shared her story and her determination for justice. The community center in East Atlanta wasn't where Danielle expected to find her salvation. Maya had arranged the meeting in a conference room that smelled of coffee and determination, where 3 women sat around a folding table sharing stories that sounded disturbingly familiar. Jennifer from Cleveland, 35, had been engaged to Richard 12 years ago. He'd convinced her to invest her inheritance in his startup, then disappeared when the company took off, leaving her broke and pregnant. She'd miscarried from the stress and never heard from him again. Lisa from Detroit, Sarah's sister, Maya's aunt, had watched Richard charm her way into their family before discarding Sarah and their baby. She'd spent years documenting his pattern of behavior, collecting evidence that would have impressed a FBI profiler. And then there was Margaret, 62, who'd had an affair with Richard 5 years into his marriage to Danielle. He'd promised to leave his wife, convinced her to liquidate her retirement account to invest in his company, then threatened to expose their relationship to her employer when she demanded her money back. He made us all feel like we were the problem, Margaret said, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. Like we were crazy for expecting him to keep his promises. Have you ever realized you weren't the only one? That the person who made you feel insane had actually perfected their manipulation on others before you? The relief was overwhelming, and so was the rage. But patterns don't lie, and Richard's pattern was clear. Charm, isolate, exploit, discard. Repeat. He has a type, Lisa observed, spreading photos across the table. Pictures of all 4 women from around the time they'd been involved with Richard. Brunettes, successful careers, family money or assets he can access, and most importantly, women who believe in fixing broken people. Danielle studied the faces staring back at her. They could have been sisters, so similar were their features and expressions. Richard hadn't just found women to exploit, he'd hunted them specifically. The nursing background was probably a bonus with you, Jennifer added. Nurses are natural caregivers. You'd never abandon someone, even when they deserved it. Maya had been quiet through most of the meeting, taking notes and building what looked like a legal strategy. But when Margaret mentioned Richard's threats of exposure, something shifted in the room. He's still doing it, Maya said. The intimidation, the financial manipulation. Yesterday, he had his lawyers contact Mrs. Cole's bank, trying to freeze accounts that are legally hers. Today, he called her sister in California, suggesting Danielle was having a mental breakdown and needed family intervention. The room fell silent. They all recognized that playbook. What can we do? Danielle asked. I mean, legally. Most of this happened years ago. Individually, probably not much, Maya admitted. But together, patterns of behavior, financial fraud, intimidation campaigns, that's when individual grievances become federal interest. She pulled out her laptop and projected an image onto the white wall. A flowchart showing Richard's companies, his financial transactions, and a web of connections that painted a picture of systematic abuse spanning decades. He's been using women's assets to build his empire, then discarding them when they're no longer useful. What he hadn't planned on was Danielle walking into the ballroom on the arm of Atlanta's most feared civil rights attorney. Danielle wore the black dress she'd bought for their 15th anniversary, the one he'd never bothered to notice. Tonight, though, she felt every eye in the room on her as she moved through the crowd with Maya beside her, both women carrying themselves like they owned the place. Mrs. Cole, the foundation director, rushed over, clearly confused about the evening's dynamics. We weren't expecting you. Is Richard? Mr. Cole is around somewhere, Maya answered smoothly, her law school training evident in every syllable. I'm Maya Brooks, Mrs. Cole's attorney. We're here about the Foundation's partnership with Cole Industries. The words hit the room like a stone dropped in still water, ripples of whispered conversation spreading from table to table. Richard's business partnerships were built on his reputation as a family man, a stable community leader. A wife appearing with her divorce attorney at his favorite charity event was not part of that carefully crafted image. Danielle spotted Richard across the room, his face pale above his black tuxedo. Their eyes met across the crowd, and she saw something she'd never seen before: fear. The confrontation came during the dinner service, when Maya stood to address the room during the traditional donation appeals. She'd somehow gotten herself added to the speaker list, and Richard's frantic gestures to the event organizers came too late. Good evening, Maya began, her voice carrying easily across the ballroom. My name is Maya Colbrooks, and I'm here tonight representing Mrs. Danielle Cole in her divorce proceedings against Richard Cole. The silence was deafening. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. Conversations died mid-sentence, and all eyes turned to the head table where Richard sat frozen. I mention this, Maya continued, because many of you do business with Mr. Cole, and you deserve to know the kind of man you're supporting. Over the past 20 years, my client's husband has systematically defrauded women who trusted him, including Mrs. Cole herself. This is inappropriate. Richard started to stand, but Maya's next words stopped him cold. Including the women who help fund the very companies you invest in. Including the daughter he abandoned 21 years ago. She paused, letting that sink in. Including me. The gasp that went through the room was audible. Danielle watched Richard's carefully constructed world crumble in real time as Maya laid out the evidence. Financial records, abandoned children, a pattern of exploitation that spanned decades. But it was during the dancing portion of the evening that the most devastating moment occurred. As the band played something slow and romantic, Richard approached Danielle's table with the arrogance that had once attracted her and now made her skin crawl. "Dance with me," he said, extending his hand. For appearances. She could have said no. Should have said no. But something in his desperation, the way his empire was collapsing around him in front of everyone who mattered, made her curious about what he'd say when they were alone on the dance floor. His hands on her waist felt different now, not possessive but pleading. As they moved to the music, she realized this might be the last time they'd ever touch. "You're destroying everything," he whispered against her ear, his voice broken. 20 years of work gone. "You destroyed it yourself," she replied, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. "I'm just making sure everyone knows who you really are." "I loved you," he said, and for a moment she almost believed him. "In my way, I did love you. Your way of loving destroys people, Richard. It always has." As the song ended, she stepped back and spoke words that would be quoted in newspapers for months to come. "I hope you learn to love differently in your next life. This one's over." The photographers captured his shocked face as she walked away, leaving him alone on the dance floor while 500 witnesses watched his reputation die. But as the evening wound down and guests filed out in uncomfortable silence, Maya whispered to Danielle, "The real bomb drops tomorrow. I hope you're ready for what we found in his company records." The gala had been Richard's public humiliation. What came next would be his complete destruction, and Danielle was about to discover that some victories come with consequences she never saw coming. While she was building a home, he was building an empire on stolen foundations, and the evidence was hiding in plain sight. Maya's hands trembled as she spread the documents across the conference table. Bank statements, wire transfers, offshore accounts. Years of Richard's financial dealings laid bare like bones picked clean by vultures. "Danielle, you need to see this." Maya's voice carried the weight of discovery that would change everything. "Your husband wasn't just emotionally abusive. He's been running money through shell companies for 15 years. The numbers swam before Danielle's eyes. Millions flowing through accounts she'd never heard of, investments in companies that existed only on paper, tax shelters that looked more like money laundering operations. "I signed some of these documents," Danielle whispered, her finger tracing her own signature on papers she barely remembered. "He said they were for the house, for our retirement." "You were a witness, not an accomplice," Maya assured her. "But Richard? He's been stealing from his own investors, hiding assets from the IRS, and using your joint accounts to clean dirty money." The pattern was breathtaking in its audacity. Richard would bring home papers during their quiet dinners, sliding them across the table with that charming smile that once made her heart race. "Just some boring business stuff, sweetheart. Sign here." And she had, trusting him completely, never questioning why he needed her signature on documents she wasn't allowed to read. "The Cayman accounts alone hold $12 million, Maya continued. "Money that should have been reported, taxed, and documented. Instead, he's been living like a king while telling you that you couldn't afford a lawyer." Danielle thought about all the times she'd asked for money for small things, new curtains, a weekend trip, dinner with her old nursing friends. How he'd made her feel guilty for spending their money while he was hiding millions in accounts she never knew existed. "There's more." Maya pulled out another file. "The Cole Foundation, his charity that you've been supporting at all those galas. It's a front. The money goes in, gets shuffled around, and ends up in his personal accounts. Every donation you helped him collect from your friends, every check you personally delivered, it was theft. The betrayal cut deeper than the divorce papers had." Danielle remembered standing beside Richard at fundraiser after fundraiser, shaking hands with donors who believed they were helping sick children. She'd personally thanked elderly couples who gave her life savings, young families who sacrificed to contribute. All of it stolen. "We need to move fast," Maya said. Once this goes public, he'll try to move everything offshore where we can't touch it. What about the house? Danielle asked. Bought with stolen money. But because you didn't know, and because you've been living there in good faith, you have rights. We can protect the house. That evening, Danielle found herself back at the mansion, walking through rooms that now felt like crime scenes. Every piece of furniture, every painting on the wall, had it been bought with stolen money? Had she been living in a museum of other people's losses? She heard Richard's car in the driveway and felt her pulse quicken. Not with fear this time, but with something else, anger, maybe, or justice finally finding its voice. He walked into the kitchen like he owned the world, loosening his tie with the same casual confidence that once made her weak in the knees. Now it made her stomach turn. We need to talk, she said. About what? The lawyers you can't afford. His smirk was ugly, cruel. About the $12 million in the Cayman accounts. The color drained from his face like water from a broken dam. For 15 years, she'd never seen Richard truly shocked. Tonight, he looked like a man who just watched his life explode. I don't know what you're talking about. Maya found everything, Richard. The shell companies, the fake charity, the offshore accounts. All of it. He moved toward her then, backing her against the marble counter where he'd first served her divorce papers. But instead of intimidation, she saw desperation in his eyes. You don't understand the pressure I was under, he said, his hands on either side of her, trapping her. The company was failing. I had to make moves that maybe weren't completely legal. You stole from sick children. I borrowed from accounts that could afford it. You made me an accessory to fraud. His mouth was inches from hers now, and she could smell the fierce sweat on him, mixed with that expensive cologne she used to love. For a moment, she remembered their wedding night, when he'd held her against another counter in their first tiny apartment, whispering promises about the empire they'd build together. We can fix this, he whispered. We can disappear. South America, maybe. I have money hidden where no one will ever find it. We can start over. By running away from the families you stole from. His laugh was bitter. You think those investors were angels? You think everyone who gave to that charity was pure? I took money from people who had so much they'd never miss it. That's not your choice to make. His hands moved to her face, fingers tangling in her hair the way they used to during their early years of marriage. I did it for us. Everything I did was for us. No, Richard, you did it for you. Everything was always for you. She pushed him away, walking toward the window where rain was starting to fall again. Maya's filing the documents tomorrow morning. By noon, every account you have will be frozen. By evening, the FBI will have everything they need. The silence stretched between them like a bridge burning. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, smaller somehow. How long have you known? About the money? Since this afternoon. About who you really are? I think I've known for years and just didn't want to see it. She turned back to face him, this man she'd built a life with, and saw a stranger wearing her husband's face. The house is in my name too, Richard. I'm keeping it. Not because I want to hurt you, but because it's the only home those stolen millions ever bought that actually sheltered someone who needed shelter. The next morning, Danielle woke to the sound of sirens. Desperate men tell truths they've spent lifetimes hiding, especially when they have nothing left to lose. The FBI raid began at dawn, but Richard wasn't in his bed at the penthouse. He was sitting in Danielle's driveway in his silver Mercedes, hands shaking as he stared at the phone that had been buzzing all morning with calls from his lawyers, his accountants, his business partners who were probably just now discovering how deep his deceptions ran. Danielle saw him from her bedroom window as she got ready for what was supposed to be a quiet morning. Instead, she found herself staring down at the man who had been her husband for 15 years and realizing she had no idea what he might do next. She walked outside in her robe and slippers, coffee mug in hand, like this was any other morning, like her world hadn't been turned inside out in the space of 24 hours. They froze everything, Richard said when she approached the car. He didn't look up from his phone. $43 million, just gone. The penthouse, the vacation home in Hilton Head, even the boat. Everything. Good, she said, and meant it. He finally looked at her then, and she saw something she'd never seen in Richard's face before, complete defeat. This man who had controlled every aspect of their life together, who had made her feel small and powerless and dependent, looked like a lost child. I never meant for it to go this far. Which part? The stealing, the lying, or the part where you tried to leave me with nothing? Any of it. All of it. He got out of the car, and she noticed he was still wearing yesterday's clothes. I started taking money from the investment fund because I thought I could put it back before anyone noticed. Just a temporary loan to cover some bad trades. When was that? 12 years ago. 12 years. Nearly their entire marriage had been built on stolen money, and she'd never suspected a thing. But then I made more bad trades trying to cover the first ones, and suddenly I needed more money to cover those, and he ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she remembered from their early dating days when he was nervous about meeting her parents. It snowballed. I kept thinking I'd find a way to put it all back, make it right. What about the charity? His laugh was hollow. That was supposed to be legitimate. At first. But when I needed clean money to pay back some investors, it was just sitting there. All that cash from people who'd never miss a few thousand here and there. She wanted to hit him. The urge was so strong she had to grip her coffee mug with both hands to keep them steady. Those people trusted you. They trusted us. I personally thanked a woman who gave her late husband's life insurance money to that charity. I know, and God, Danielle, I've been carrying this weight for so long, I forgot what it felt like to breathe without it pressing down on my chest. The sirens were getting closer now. Someone must have called the police when they saw Richard's car in the driveway, or maybe the FBI had tracked him here. Either way, their time was running out. Why did you really leave your daughter? She asked. Maya and the other women. What were you running from? Richard leaned against the car, like it was the only thing keeping him upright. I was 19 when Maya's mother got pregnant. 19 and scared and convinced that having a baby would ruin my life. So I ran. And the others? Same thing, different cities. Every time life got complicated, every time someone needed more from me than I thought I could give, I just left. Started over somewhere else with a new name, a new story, a new woman who didn't know about all the people I'd abandoned. The sirens turned onto their street now. 2 police cars, followed by an unmarked sedan that probably held federal agents with very serious expressions and very thick files. I thought marrying you would be different, Richard said. You were so steady, so willing to trust me, to believe in me. I thought maybe if I found someone who made me feel like a good man, I could actually become one. Instead, you turned me into another victim. No. He stepped toward her, and she saw tears in his eyes, real ones, not the manipulative kind he'd used during arguments when he wanted to avoid taking responsibility. You were never a victim, Danielle. You were the only real thing in my fake life. Every stolen dollar, every lie I told, every night I lay awake knowing I was living on borrowed time, it was all worth it because it meant I got to come home to you. That's not love, Richard. That's possession. I know that now. I've known it for years, but I didn't know how to be anything else. I never learned how to love someone without trying to control them, how to build something real instead of just taking what I wanted. The police cars stopped at the curb. 4 officers got out, hands resting on their weapons, taking in the scene with trained eyes. The federal agents were taking their time, probably running Richard's license plates and checking for warrants. I'm scared, Richard admitted, his voice breaking. I'm scared of going to prison, scared of losing everything, scared of who I am when I can't hide behind money and power. But mostly I'm scared that you'll remember me as a monster instead of remembering the parts of me that actually loved you. The officers were walking up the driveway now, moving carefully, probably wondering if this was a domestic situation or something more complicated. Richard Cole, one of them called out. We need to talk to you, sir. Richard looked at Danielle one last time. For what it's worth, everything I told you about loving you is true. It's the only true thing I've said in 15 years. Then he turned toward the officers, hands already raised in surrender, and Danielle realized she was watching the end of her marriage and the beginning of something else entirely. Love doesn't end just because the person you loved turns out to be a lie. It just becomes the most dangerous emotion you'll ever feel. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters, cameras, and people holding signs. Some supported Richard, calling him a victim of circumstance who'd made mistakes, but didn't deserve to be destroyed. Others called for justice, holding photos of families who'd lost their savings to his schemes. Danielle sat in the witness chair, looking out at a courtroom filled with faces she recognized. Former friends, business associates, people from their social circle who were trying to decide whether she was a victim or an accomplice. The weight of their judgment pressed down on her shoulders like a heavy coat she couldn't take off. "Mrs. Cole," the prosecutor said, approaching the witness, stand with a folder thick enough to tell a life story. "How long were you married to the defendant?" 15 years. During that time, did you have any knowledge of his illegal financial activities? The question she'd been dreading. The one that would determine whether people saw her as naive or complicit, as someone who deserved sympathy or someone who should have known better. "No, I did not. Yet you signed numerous documents related to these financial transactions. Can you explain why?" Danielle's hands were trembling in her lap. She looked across the courtroom and found Richard at the defendant's table, wearing a suit she'd probably helped pick out, looking smaller than she'd ever seen him. "My husband told me they were routine business documents. He said I needed to sign them for tax purposes, or for insurance, or for joint property ownership. I trusted him completely." "Did you ever ask to read these documents before signing them?" "In the beginning, yes. But he would get frustrated when I asked questions. He said I wouldn't understand the legal language anyway, that my job was to support him, not to question every business decision he made." The prosecutor nodded, making notes. "Can you describe your husband's attitude toward money during your marriage?" This was harder to answer than she'd expected. "How do you explain 15 years of subtle financial control to people who've never lived it?" "He controlled all our finances. I had a credit card and a small checking account, but every purchase I made was monitored. If I spent too much on groceries or bought something for the house without asking, he'd make comments about my spending habits. Yet Mr. Cole was spending millions on personal expenses, vacations, and luxury items during this same period. I didn't know about most of it. The expensive watches, the art collection, the investments. He told me they were business expenses or gifts from clients." She could feel the courtroom watching her, weighing her words. Some faces showed sympathy, others skepticism. How could a grown woman be so naive? How could someone live with a man for 15 years and not know he was stealing millions? The defense attorney's turn was harder. He was a sharp-faced man with cold eyes who made her feel like she was the one on trial. "Mrs. Cole, you lived a very comfortable lifestyle during your marriage, didn't you?" "Yes. Designer clothes, expensive vacations, a mansion in Buckhead, charity galas where you wore jewelry worth more than most people's annual salaries." "Yes, but I didn't know where the money was coming from." "You didn't ask because you didn't want to know, isn't that true?" The question hit like a physical blow. Because there had been moments, hadn't there? Times when she'd wondered how Richard could afford their lifestyle on his declared income. Times when she'd started to ask a question and then stopped herself because his reaction made it clear that questions weren't welcome. "I trusted my husband," she said finally. "Maybe that was naive, but it wasn't criminal." "You enjoyed the benefits of his criminal activity for 15 years. You ate at expensive restaurants, traveled to luxury resorts, lived in a home worth over $2 million. And now you want this court to believe you were just an innocent victim." Danielle felt her cheeks burning. This was why she'd been dreading the trial. Not because she was afraid of legal consequences, but because she'd have to face the truth about her own willful blindness. "I was a victim of emotional and financial abuse," she said, her voice stronger now. "But you're right that I benefited from money I didn't know was stolen. If I could give back every expensive dinner, every vacation, every piece of jewelry, I would. Nothing I gained from those 15 years was worth the harm that was done to innocent people." The courtroom was quiet now. Even the reporters had stopped writing to listen. "I love my husband," she continued, looking directly at Richard for the first time since the trial began. "I loved him when I thought he was a successful businessman who worked hard for everything we had. I loved him when I discovered he was a thief and a liar who had stolen from people who trusted him. And I still love him now, sitting in that chair, facing the consequences of choices I wish he'd never made." Her voice was breaking, but she kept going. "But loving someone doesn't mean enabling them. It doesn't mean staying silent when they're hurting people. And it doesn't mean sacrificing justice for the sake of loyalty. She wiped her eyes and looked out at the packed courtroom. I don't know if my husband is capable of change. I don't know if 15 years of lying and stealing can be undone by apologies and good intentions. But I know that the families he stole from deserve their money back. And I know that other women married to men like Richard need to see that there are consequences for financial abuse. The prosecutor's final question hung in the silence. Mrs. Cole, knowing everything you know now, do you still believe your husband is capable of change? Danielle looked at Richard one more time, seeing past the expensive suit to the broken man underneath. I believe anyone is capable of change, she said. But I also believe that change has to be proven through actions, not just promised through words. And right now, the only action that matters is making sure this never happens to anyone else. Justice served cold tastes different than revenge served hot. Sometimes it tastes like freedom you never knew you wanted. The jury took 4 hours to reach their verdict. 4 hours for 12 strangers to decide that 15 years of lies, theft, and betrayal deserved consequences. When the foreman stood to read their decision, the courtroom fell silent except for the sound of reporters' pens scratching against paper and cameras clicking in the gallery. On the charge of wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. Richard's shoulders sagged like a building collapsing in slow motion. On the charge of money laundering, we find the defendant guilty. His lawyer put a hand on his arm, but Richard was staring straight ahead, no longer the confident man who had once controlled every detail of Danielle's life. On the charge of tax evasion, we find the defendant guilty. The judge's sentencing would come later, but everyone in that courtroom knew Richard Cole was going to prison. The only question was for how long. Danielle felt something she hadn't expected, not satisfaction or vindication, but a strange kind of emptiness. For months, this trial had been the center of her world, the thing that got her up in the morning and kept her awake at night. Now it was over, and she realized she had no idea who she was supposed to be next. Outside the courthouse, Maya found her sitting on a bench, watching the news crews pack up their equipment. "How are you feeling?" Maya asked, settling beside her. "Empty. Tired. Free, maybe." Danielle turned to look at this remarkable woman who had become her lawyer, her friend, and something like family. "What happens now?" "Now we work on getting the money back to the people Richard stole from. The government will auction his assets, liquidate his accounts, and distribute everything to his victims. It'll take time, but most people will get at least some of their money back. And the house, yours to keep. Since you had no knowledge of the crimes, and you were a victim of financial abuse, the court ruled that you have a right to maintain your residence." Danielle almost laughed. The house that had once been her prison was now her sanctuary, bought with stolen money, but legally hers to keep. There was irony in that, or maybe justice. She wasn't sure she knew the difference anymore. "There's something else," Maya said, pulling out an official-looking document. "Richard's business assets, once liquidated, are worth about $32 million. After victim restitution, there will be about $8 million left over. That goes to the government, right? For prosecution costs." Actually, no. Richard signed papers transferring any remaining assets to a foundation that would support abandoned children and women escaping financial abuse. Maya handed her the document. "He wants you to run it." Danielle stared at the papers, reading Richard's signature at the bottom. Even facing prison, even after losing everything, he was still trying to control her life. Or maybe, and this thought was harder to accept, maybe he was finally trying to do something right. "I don't want anything from him." "This isn't from him, not really. This is money that was stolen from innocent people, and now it has a chance to help other innocent people. You could turn it down, let the government keep it, or you could use it to make sure other women never go through what you went through." That night, Danielle walked through her empty house, their empty house, for the first time since Richard's arrest. The silence felt different now. Not oppressive, but peaceful. The sound of her footsteps on marble floors wasn't echoing through a mausoleum anymore. It was marking the beginning of something new. She found herself in Richard's study, looking at the bookshelves full of business journals and legal texts he'd probably never read. Behind his desk was a photo she'd forgotten about. Their wedding picture, the two of them laughing at some joke she couldn't remember, looking impossibly young and hopeful. She picked up the frame, studying her younger self. That woman had believed in love, in partnership, in building something beautiful together. That woman had no idea she was signing up to be controlled, manipulated, and ultimately betrayed by the man who promised to cherish her. But that woman had also been stronger than she knew. Strong enough to survive 15 years of subtle abuse. Strong enough to find her voice when it mattered. Strong enough to choose justice over loyalty when the choice became clear. Danielle set the photo back on the desk and walked to the window. Outside, Atlanta stretched out in all directions, full of people living their own complicated lives, making their own difficult choices. Somewhere in that sprawling city were women married to men who controlled their finances, their friendships, their sense of self-worth. Women who might never find the courage to speak up unless they saw that survival was possible. She thought about Maya's offer, about the foundation that could be built from the wreckage of her marriage. $8 million could fund a lot of lawyers for women who couldn't afford to fight back. It could create shelters, support groups, educational programs. It could take Richard's legacy of harm and transform it into something that actually helped people. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. "Hello, Mrs. Cole. This is Jennifer Martinez. I was one of the investors your husband stole from." Danielle's heart sank. She'd been dreading these calls, conversations with people who had lost their life savings because of Richard's crimes. "I'm so sorry," Danielle said. "I know that doesn't help, but I'm truly sorry for what he did to you." "That's not why I'm calling," Jennifer said quickly. "I wanted to thank you." "Thank me?" "For testifying, for telling the truth, even though it was hard. My daughter saw you on the news, and she said something that stuck with me. She said you looked like someone who had been scared for a long time and finally decided not to be scared anymore." Danielle felt tears starting, but they weren't sad tears. "I've been married for 23 years to a man who controls our money the same way your husband controlled yours," Jennifer continued. "I've been making excuses for him, telling myself it's just his way of managing things. But watching your trial made me realize that financial control is still control, and control isn't love. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to see a lawyer. And if there's ever a foundation that helps women like us, I want to be part of it." After Jennifer hung up, Danielle sat in the quiet house and made her decision. The Richard Cole Foundation for Abandoned Children would become the Danielle Cole Foundation for Financial Justice. And its first case would be helping women like Jennifer find the courage to reclaim their own lives. Some conversations can only happen through bulletproof glass, where honesty is the only currency that matters. The Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison wasn't what Danielle had expected. She'd imagined something from the movies, gray concrete walls and bars everywhere. But the visiting room looked more like a sterile cafeteria with small tables and uncomfortable plastic chairs. The bulletproof glass partition between visitors and inmates was the only thing that reminded her this wasn't just an awkward meeting in a strange place. Richard looked different, thinner, older, wearing an orange jumpsuit that made his skin look gray. His hair, always perfectly styled during their marriage, was shorter now and streaked with gray she'd never noticed before. When he sat down across from her and picked up the black telephone, she could see that his hands were shaking. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice tiny through the phone speaker. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either." 6 months had passed since the trial. 6 months of Danielle building the foundation, helping other women escape financial abuse, learning who she was when she wasn't defined by being Richard's wife. She'd cut her hair shorter, started wearing colors she'd always loved, but he'd said were too bright for someone her age. She'd taken up painting again, something she'd abandoned when Richard convinced her it was a waste of time and money. "You look good," Richard said. "Different. Happy, maybe." "I'm happy. Most days. I'm glad. I know that probably sounds strange coming from me, but I'm glad you're happy." The silence stretched between them, filled with 15 years of shared history that felt both intimate and foreign now. This man across from her had been her husband, her partner, the person she'd planned to grow old with. Now, he was a stranger in prison clothes, and she was a woman discovering her own strength. Maya told me about the foundation, Richard said finally. $8 million helping women escape the kind of marriage I put you through. There's some justice in that, I suppose. It's not about justice. It's about making sure other women have options I didn't think I had. You always had options, Danielle. I just made sure you couldn't see them. The honesty in his voice surprised her. During their marriage, Richard had never admitted to deliberate manipulation. Everything had been her fault, her overreaction, her inability to understand the pressures he was under. Why, she asked. Why did you need to control everything so completely? Richard set down the phone for a moment, running his hands over his face like he was trying to wipe away years of pretense. When he picked it up again, his eyes were wet. Because I was terrified you'd leave if you knew who I really was. Who were you really? A coward. A man who ran away from every responsibility he'd ever had, who started over with new names and new stories every time life got complicated. I was so afraid you'd see through me that I built walls around our entire relationship. You could have just told me the truth. Could I? Could I have told you I'd abandoned 3 children? That I'd stolen money from my first business partner? That I'd never learned how to be in a relationship without trying to own the other person? She wanted to say yes, that honesty would have been better than lies, but she wasn't sure that was true. Would she have married Richard if she'd known about his history of abandonment? Would she have built a life with a man who had a pattern of running when things got difficult? I loved you, she said. I really loved you. If you trusted me with the truth, we might have worked through it. I loved you too. That's the hell of it. Everything I did to keep you was the reason I lost you. Through the glass, she watched Richard cry, really cry, probably for the first time since she'd known him. During their marriage, he'd used tears as manipulation, quick bursts of emotion designed to end arguments and make her feel guilty for questioning him. These tears were different. Raw, ugly, real. I can't undo what I did, he said. I can't give back the years I stole from you. Can't return the money I took from people who trusted me. But I can make sure other men don't repeat my mistakes. What do you mean? I'm leading a group here. Men who are in prison for domestic violence, financial crimes, abandonment cases. We talk about the patterns that brought us here, the choices we made that hurt the people we claim to love. This was the last thing she'd expected to hear. Richard, who had never admitted fault during their marriage, was now counseling other men about their failures. There's a man here, Tony, who's in for stealing his wife's inheritance and gambling it away. Another one, Marcus, who used his girlfriend's credit cards to finance his drug habit. We all tell ourselves we're different, that our situations were special, but the patterns are exactly the same. And you think talking about it helps? I think admitting the truth helps. Saying out loud that I was a financial abuser, that I manipulated you psychologically for 15 years, that I chose to control you instead of trusting you. It helps me understand why I made those choices, so I never make them again. Danielle studied his face through the glass, looking for signs of manipulation, for the charm that had once made her believe everything he told her. She found something she'd never seen there before. Genuine remorse mixed with something that looked like peace. I dream about you sometimes, Richard said. Not romantic dreams, but dreams where I get to apologize properly, where I get to tell you that none of it was your fault, that you were never the problem, that you deserved so much better than what I gave you. You're telling me that now. Am I too late? The question hung between them like a bridge she could choose to cross or burn. Forgiveness wasn't about Richard. She'd learned through months of therapy. It wasn't about whether he deserved it or whether he'd changed enough to earn it. Forgiveness was about her own freedom, about choosing not to carry anger that was heavier than love had ever been. I forgive you, she said, and felt something she'd been carrying for months finally lift from her shoulders. Not because you've earned it, but because I'm tired of letting our marriage poison the rest of my life. Richard pressed his hand against the glass, and for a moment she almost pressed hers against it too. Instead, she stood up, suddenly ready to return to her life, her foundation, her future that had nothing to do with the man behind the glass. Goodbye, Richard. Goodbye, Danielle. Thank you for giving me a chance to be honest, finally. As she walked out of the prison, Danielle realized she wasn't sad. She felt lighter, cleaner, like she'd finally closed a chapter of her life that had been left hanging open. Richard would serve his time, hopefully become a better man, maybe even help other men avoid the mistakes he'd made. And she would continue building something beautiful from the ruins he'd left behind. The lawyer fighting for justice carried a secret that connected her to Danielle in ways neither woman could have imagined. Richard's letter burned in Danielle's hands as she sat across from Maya in the coffee shop near the courthouse. 3 months had passed since the sentencing, and life had settled into a new rhythm. The foundation was growing, the media attention was fading, and Maya had become more than just her attorney. She'd become the sister Danielle never knew she needed. "There's something I need to tell you," Maya said, her fingers wrapped around her coffee cup like it might anchor her to the earth. "About why I really took your case." Danielle looked up from Richard's letter. She'd been putting off reading it, afraid of what new manipulation it might contain. "I thought it was because Richard was your father. That's part of it." Maya's voice carried a weight Danielle had never heard before. "But there's more. Something I discovered when I started digging into his past." The coffee shop buzzed around them, but Danielle felt like they were sitting in a bubble of silence. Maya pulled out a manila folder, the kind that had become so familiar during the trial preparations. "When I was investigating Richard's history, I had to trace his movements through different cities. Detroit, Cleveland, Charleston. I found records of all his relationships, all the women he left behind." Maya's hands trembled slightly as she opened the folder. "But I also found something else. Adoption records." Danielle's stomach dropped. "Maya, what are you saying?" "Your mother, Patricia Williams, gave birth to a daughter in Detroit in 1992. She was 17, unmarried, and couldn't keep the baby." Maya slid a document across the table. "That baby was placed through Catholic Family Services. The adoptive parents were James and Linda Brooks." The words swam before Danielle's eyes. She thought about her mother, who had died when Danielle was 25. They'd been close, but her mother had always been secretive about her teenage years. Always changed the subject when Danielle asked about growing up in Detroit. "You're saying—" Danielle's voice came out as a whisper. "I'm saying Patricia Williams was my birth mother too. You're my sister, Danielle. My biological sister." The coffee cup slipped from Danielle's fingers, hitting the table with a sharp crack. Hot liquid spread across the wood, but neither woman moved to clean it up. "That's impossible," Danielle breathed. "My mother would have told me." "Would she have?" Maya leaned forward, her eyes intense but gentle. "Think about it. She was a teenager who gave up a baby she couldn't raise. Maybe she thought she was protecting you from that pain. Maybe she planned to tell you someday and never got the chance." Danielle's mind raced backward through memories of her mother. The way Patricia had always volunteered at the children's hospital. The sadness that sometimes crossed her face when she watched Danielle with other kids. The boxes in the attic that Danielle had never been allowed to open. "This means—" Danielle started, then stopped. The implications were staggering. "This means the man who destroyed your marriage is the same man who abandoned our mother 30 years ago. This means we found each other because of him, despite him." Maya's voice grew stronger. "And this means every time I fought for you in that courtroom, I was also fighting for the sister I never knew I had." Danielle stared at Maya's face, seeing it differently now. The shape of their eyes was the same, the way they both tilted their heads when they were thinking. How had she missed it? "Does this change anything?" Danielle asked, afraid of the answer. "Everything and nothing," Maya said simply. "It changes why I care so much about your case succeeding. It changes why I've felt so protective of you from the moment we met. But it doesn't change the fact that you deserved justice regardless of our connection." Danielle reached across the table and took Maya's hand. "All my life, I felt like something was missing. Like I was supposed to have someone else beside me, fighting the world with me." "Me too," Maya whispered. "Even with loving adoptive parents, even with success and recognition, there was always this empty space. Like I was looking for someone who understood me without explanation." They sat in silence for a moment, hands clasped across the coffee-stained table. Around them, life continued, People ordering drinks, typing on laptops, having normal conversations about normal problems. But their world had shifted completely. Richard's letter, Maya said finally. What does it say? Danielle had almost forgotten about it in the shock of Maya's revelation. She picked up the envelope, her hand steadier now. Inside was a single sheet of prison stationery with Richard's careful handwriting. He says he knew. Danielle read aloud. He says he figured it out when he saw us together at the first hearing. The resemblance, the way we moved, the way we both did that thing where we touch our ear when we're nervous. Maya's hand went automatically to her ear. He says that's why he didn't fight harder. Because he realized he hadn't just hurt one family. He'd brought together two sisters who could destroy him properly. Danielle looked up. Even his confession is about him. Of course it is. Maya's laugh held no humor. The man who spent his life running from family connections suddenly becomes an expert on recognizing them. There's more, Danielle continued reading. He says he's glad we found each other. That maybe something good came from all the damage he caused. Don't give him that credit, Maya said firmly. We found each other despite him, not because of him. Our mother brought us together across 30 years and death itself. Richard was just the catalyst. Danielle folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. What happens now? Do we tell people? Do you want to? Danielle thought about it. The media would go crazy. The foundation would get more attention, but maybe for the wrong reasons. Their story would become even more dramatic, more sensational. But none of that mattered compared to the woman sitting across from her. The sister who had fought for her when she couldn't fight for herself. The family she'd been searching for without knowing it. I want people to know, Danielle said finally. Not for the drama or the headlines, but because women need to see that sometimes the family you need finds you when you need them most. Even if it takes 30 years. Even if it happens in the middle of the worst experience of your life. Maya squeezed her hand. Sisters. Sisters. As they left the coffee shop together, Danielle felt a completeness she'd never experienced before. Richard had tried to isolate her, to make her believe she was alone in the world. But he'd unknowingly brought her to the one person who understood her better than anyone else ever could. The DNA test would confirm what they both already knew in their hearts. But blood was just biology. What they'd built together, the trust, the shared fight, the fierce protection of each other, that was family. Blood doesn't make family, but shared survival can create bonds stronger than DNA ever could. 6 months later, Danielle stood in the bright lobby of the newly expanded Colbrooks Foundation for Family Justice. The name change had been Maya's idea, honoring both their shared mission and their newly discovered connection. The DNA test had confirmed what their hearts already knew, but seeing it in black and white had still felt like a small miracle. The reporter from CNN is here, Maya announced, walking through the glass doors with her usual purposeful stride. She'd cut her hair shorter since the trial, and it made her look older, more authoritative. Are you ready for this? Danielle smoothed her navy dress and nodded. The foundation had helped over 200 women in 6 months, and their success rate was gaining national attention. Today's interview would potentially triple their reach. I'm ready. And she was. The woman who had once been afraid to speak up in her own marriage now felt comfortable addressing millions of viewers. Are you together? Maya asked, extending her hand. Together. The interview went better than either woman had hoped. The reporter, Sarah Chun, asked thoughtful questions about their work, their connection, and how finding each other had changed their approach to helping other women. People might say it's convenient that Richard Cole's abandoned daughter ended up being your attorney, Sarah said to Danielle. How do you respond to that? I'd say it shows that sometimes the universe has a sense of justice that courtrooms can't match, Danielle replied. Maya earned her place in that courtroom through years of study and dedication to civil rights. She earned her place in my life by fighting for me when no one else would. Finding out we're sisters just explained why it felt so natural. After the cameras stopped rolling, Maya and Danielle walked through the foundation offices. The space buzzed with activity, social workers meeting with clients, attorneys reviewing cases, volunteers organizing donations. What had started as Danielle's personal legal battle had grown into something neither woman could have imagined. Mrs. Cole, a young woman, approached them hesitantly. Jessica was 22, married to a man who controlled every dollar she spent. She'd been coming to the foundation for 3 weeks, building the courage to leave. "How are you doing, Jessica?" Danielle asked, giving her full attention. "I did it. I opened the bank account. Used the address you gave me." Jessica's smile was bright but nervous. "He doesn't know yet." Maya stepped forward. "Do you have somewhere safe to go when you're ready?" "My sister's apartment. She said she's been waiting for me to call for 2 years." Jessica's eyes filled with tears. "I just wanted to thank you both. Seeing how you two support each other, how you built something together instead of just surviving apart. It showed me what family could look like." After Jessica left, Danielle and Maya stood in comfortable silence. The late afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors. "She's going to make it," Maya said. "How do you know?" "Because she has hope now. And hope is contagious." Danielle's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, the architect she'd been dating for 3 months. Simple message. "Dinner tonight? I am cooking." Simple, straightforward, no games or manipulation. She'd forgotten relationships could feel this easy. "Go," Maya said, reading her expression. "You've got that look you get when he texts." "What look?" "The look of a woman who remembers she deserves to be treated well." Maya grinned. "Besides, I have a date too." "With the prosecutor from the Jenkins case?" "Maybe." Maya's smile was secretive. "Don't change the subject. How's it going with Marcus?" Danielle considered the question seriously. Dating after Richard felt like learning a new language. Marcus didn't need to know where she was every moment. He didn't criticize her friends or question her spending. When she talked about the foundation, he listened with genuine interest instead of barely concealed resentment. "It's scary," she admitted, "being with someone who actually likes who I am." "Good scary or bad scary?" "Good scary. Like jumping off a diving board scary. Thrilling but safe at the same time." They walked toward the parking garage together, their footsteps echoing in the concrete space. Maya's car was parked next to Danielle's, a detail that always made Danielle smile. Even their unconscious choices aligned. "Maya," Danielle said as they reached their cars, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd found each other sooner? Before Richard, before all the damage?" Maya leaned against her car, considering. "Sometimes. But then I think about how finding each other in the middle of crisis taught us things we might never have learned otherwise. We know we can trust each other under pressure. We know we fight well together. We know we can build something meaningful from complete destruction." "You're right." Danielle unlocked her car, then paused. "I used to think family was something that happened to you. Now I know it's something you choose every day." "Speaking of which," Maya said, pulling an envelope from her purse, "I got something in the mail today. From Richard's attorney." Danielle's stomach tightened. Even from prison, he could still send ripples through their peace. "What now?" "I don't know. I haven't opened it yet." Maya held out the envelope. "Want to face it together?" They stood between their cars in the dim garage, surrounded by the ordinary sounds of city life continuing above them. Danielle took one side of the envelope. Maya took the other, and they tore it open together. Inside was a single sheet of legal letterhead and a smaller, sealed envelope marked personal. "It's about his health," Maya read from the legal document. "He's been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. 6 months to live, maybe less." The personal envelope contained a brief handwritten note. "I know I have no right to ask, but I'm dying. Could I see you both? Not for forgiveness, just to say goodbye properly." They looked at each other across the roof of Maya's car. 20 years ago, Richard had walked away from his responsibilities. Now he was asking the women he'd abandoned to witness his death. "What do you think?" Maya asked. "I think," Danielle said slowly, "that we get to choose how this story ends." "Not him." The call came at midnight, jolting both women from sleep with identical rings on their phones. The doctors gave him 6 months, but Richard Cole's body had other plans. Dying men seek absolution, but sometimes the greatest mercy is letting them face their truth alone. The hospital room smelled like disinfectant and dying flowers. Richard lay propped against white pillows, looking smaller than either woman remembered. Prison had aged him, but illness had shrunk him into something barely recognizable as the man who had once commanded boardrooms and intimidated judges. Danielle and Maya sat on opposite sides of his bed, not by plan, but by instinct. Even in this moment, they were presenting a united front. "You came," Richard said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We came," Danielle replied. She didn't say they debated it for 3 days. Didn't mention the late-night phone calls where she and Maya talked through what they owed him, if anything. In the end, they decided this wasn't about what he deserved. It was about who they chose to be. "I don't expect forgiveness," he continued, struggling to sit up straighter. "I know I don't deserve it." Maya leaned back in her chair, studying him with the same intensity she'd once brought to cross-examinations. "Then why did you ask us to come?" "Because I need you to hear something. And I need to say it while I can still form the words." The afternoon sun filtered through the hospital window, casting everything in a soft, golden light that made the scene feel more peaceful than it had any right to be. Outside, Atlanta continued its busy rhythm: traffic, construction, people going about their normal lives. Inside this room, a different kind of accounting was taking place. "When I left Detroit the first time," Richard began, "I told myself I was too young to be a father. When I left Cleveland, I told myself I was protecting them from my failures. When I left Charleston, I convinced myself they were better off without me." He paused, gathering strength for what came next. "But when I served you those divorce papers, Danielle, I finally understood what I really was. Not a man who made mistakes. Not someone who was protecting anyone. I was a coward who destroyed everything good in his life rather than risk being vulnerable." Danielle felt tears building behind her eyes, but she held them back. She'd cried enough over this man. Today was for truth, not grief. "I spent 30 years building walls around myself," Richard continued. "Making money, acquiring power, controlling situations, so I never had to face the possibility of being abandoned first. And in the process, I became exactly the kind of man who deserved to be abandoned." Maya spoke for the first time since they'd sat down. "Do you think recognizing it now makes up for the damage?" "No." His answer was immediate and firm. "Recognition isn't redemption. Understanding why you cause harm doesn't erase the harm. I'm not asking for absolution, Maya. I'm asking for the chance to take full responsibility while I still can." "Then do it," Danielle said quietly. "Take responsibility. All of it." Richard turned toward her, and for a moment she saw a glimpse of the man she'd married. Not the controlling tyrant he'd become, but the ambitious young executive who'd promised her the world. "I stole 15 years of your life, Danielle. I made you doubt your own worth, your own judgment, your own right to happiness. I used your love as a weapon against you, and I made you believe that my failures were somehow your fault." The words hung in the sterile air between them. "I abandoned 3 children and broke the hearts of 4 women who trusted me with their futures. I built my career on illegal activities and put you at risk without your knowledge. I used my power to intimidate and silence people who threatened my control." He looked at Maya. "And I robbed you of the chance to know your father during the years when it might have mattered. I can't give you back your childhood, but I can give you the truth about why I wasn't there." "Why?" Maya asked. "Why did you really leave?" "Because your mother was everything I wanted to be and wasn't brave enough to become. She was kind without being weak, strong without being cruel. She would have expected me to be better, and I was terrified I couldn't live up to that expectation. So I ran instead of trying." The machines around Richard's bed beeped steadily, marking time in a room where time was running out. Danielle found herself thinking about forgiveness, not as absolution for him, but as freedom for herself. "I forgive you," she said suddenly, surprising herself with the words. "Not because you deserve it, not because what you did was okay, but because carrying anger for the rest of my life will be letting you steal even more from me." Maya looked at her sharply. "Danielle, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to." Danielle stood up, moving to the window. "Forgiveness isn't about him, Maya. It's about us. It's about choosing what we carry forward and what we leave behind." Richard's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Danielle said, turning back toward the bed. Thank me by dying with the truth instead of more lies. Thank me by understanding that forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. You're still going to die alone with the weight of what you did. Forgiveness just means I'm not going to let that weight crush me too. Maya was quiet for a long moment, processing. Finally, she spoke. I can't forgive you, she said to Richard. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I can accept that you're dying with regret instead of defiance. I can accept that some part of you finally understands the damage you caused. That's enough, Richard whispered. That's more than I deserved. They sat in silence as the sun set outside the window. A nurse came in to check Richard's vitals, her soft-soled shoes squeaking on the linoleum floor. Life continued around them, indifferent to the reckoning taking place in room 314. There's something else, Richard said as visiting hours wound down. In my personal effects, there's a deed to some property in North Carolina. Mountain land I bought years ago, but never developed. It's worth about $3 million now. He looked between the two women who had become his judge and jury. I'm leaving it to both of you, for the foundation. Not as payment for damage caused. Nothing could pay for that. But as the only useful thing I can do with what's left of my life. Danielle and Maya exchanged glances. Even in death, Richard was trying to control the narrative, to be remembered for this final gesture rather than the decades of destruction that preceded it. But $3 million would help a lot of women escape situations like Danielle had faced. It would expand their reach, fund more attorneys, create more safe houses. We'll take it, Maya said finally. But we'll use it to make sure other women don't have to suffer what you put our clients through. Your money will become their freedom. Good, Richard said. That's good. As visiting hours ended, Danielle and Maya gathered their things. At the door, Danielle turned back one last time. Goodbye, Richard. He nodded, understanding that this was final. Goodbye, Danielle. Take care of each other. They walked out together, leaving him alone with his regrets and his remaining time. In the parking lot, Maya took Danielle's hand. Do you really forgive him? She asked. I'm working on it, Danielle replied honestly. But I meant what I said in there. Forgiveness is for me, not for him. I refuse to let him steal any more of my peace. 2 weeks later, Richard Cole died alone in his hospital room. The obituary was brief and factual. The funeral was attended by his attorney, 2 former business associates, and the women whose lives he had tried to destroy, but who had instead found strength in each other. When powerful men fall, they leave craters, but sometimes those craters become gardens where new life grows. The memorial service was nothing like Richard would have wanted. No marble halls or expensive flowers. No speeches about his business accomplishments or charitable contributions. Instead, 50 people gathered in the Foundation's main conference room to honor not his life, but the lives he'd tried to destroy and the women who had refused to stay broken. Danielle stood at the front of the room, looking out at faces that had become familiar over the past year. Clients who had found their voices. Attorneys who donated their time. Social workers who saw hope where others saw only damage. Maya sat in the front row, offering silent support. We're not here to celebrate Richard Cole, Danielle began. We're here to acknowledge that his death marks the end of a chapter that began long before I met him. A chapter of women being silenced, controlled, and abandoned by men who saw us as possessions rather than people. She paused, looking down at her notes, then decided to speak from her heart instead. Richard spent his life running from responsibility. Today, we take responsibility for making sure his story doesn't repeat itself. The foundation that bears our names will outlive him, outlast him, and out-impact anything he ever built. After the service, people lingered in small groups, reluctant to end this moment of collective strength. Danielle found herself in conversation with Marcus, who had attended to support her, but was clearly moved by the entire experience. I've never seen anything like this, he admitted. Turning someone's funeral into a rally for justice. It's not a rally, Danielle corrected gently. It's accountability. Richard wanted to be remembered as a successful businessman who made some mistakes. We're making sure he's remembered as a cautionary tale about the cost of treating people as disposable. Maya approached with a manila envelope in her hands. Even after a year of working together, she still carried important documents personally rather than trusting them to email or mail. The property transfer went through, she announced. $3.2 million after taxes and fees. Plus, we got the life insurance payout. Apparently, his lawyer managed to keep one policy that wasn't seized in the criminal proceedings. How much total? Marcus asked. $4.8 million, Maya said. Enough to expand nationwide. Enough to help thousands of women instead of hundreds. Danielle felt the weight of that number. In his death, Richard had accidentally provided more support for women's freedom than he'd ever offered in his life. There was a bitter irony in it that she chose not to dwell on. There's something else, Maya continued, pulling a letter from the envelope. This was in his personal effects. It's addressed to the daughters I failed. Danielle took the letter, recognizing Richard's handwriting. Even facing death, his penmanship had remained precise and controlled. Should we read it now? She asked. Together, Maya said, as she always did. They found a quiet corner of the conference room as people began to leave. The letter was longer than his previous communications, written on several sheets of legal paper. To Maya and Danielle, Danielle read aloud, and to the other daughters whose names I never learned. I am writing this knowing I have days, maybe hours left. The pain medication makes it hard to think clearly, but some thoughts have never been clearer. I have spent my entire adult life afraid of being abandoned, and in that fear, I became someone who deserved abandonment. I control because I was afraid of being left. I left before I could be left. I destroyed love before it could destroy me. But watching you two together these past months, seeing the foundation you built, reading about the women you've helped, I finally understand what I missed. I was so afraid of being vulnerable that I never learned the difference between love and possession. Maya, you became the kind of lawyer I pretended to respect, but actually feared, someone who fought for justice instead of just winning. You got that from your mother, not from me. I contributed nothing to your character except serving as an example of what not to become. Danielle, you loved me in ways I didn't understand and couldn't reciprocate. You offered me partnership, and I demanded submission. You offered me trust, and I responded with control. You deserved a husband who celebrated your strength instead of trying to diminish it. I cannot undo the damage I caused, but I can use my death to serve a purpose my life never did. The money I'm leaving is not payment for pain caused. No amount could cover that debt. It's the only useful thing I can do with what remains of my existence. Use it to help other women escape men like me. Use it to teach other men not to become like me. Use it to prove that the worst of us cannot destroy the best of us. I am dying alone as I lived alone because I never learned that connection requires vulnerability. You two found each other despite my attempts to isolate you both. You built something beautiful from the wreckage I created. That's your victory, not my gift. Tell the women you help that they are not responsible for fixing the men who hurt them. Tell them that leaving takes more courage than staying. Tell them that their voices matter more than their silence. I cannot ask for your forgiveness because I understand now that forgiveness is not something that can be requested. It can only be freely given, and you owe me nothing. But I can ask that you remember me as a warning rather than a tragedy. I was not a good man brought down by circumstances. I was a man who chose fear over love, control over trust, isolation over connection. Those were choices, not mistakes. Learn from my failures. Teach others to learn from them. Let my life serve as evidence that it's never too late to choose differently. And let my death serve as proof of what happens when you wait too long to make that choice. Thank you for showing me who I could have been. I am sorry I was too afraid to become that man while there was still time. Richard Cole, written October 15th, 2 days before his death. Maya wiped tears from her eyes. Even his apology is about him. But it's true, Danielle said quietly. And truth is useful, even when it comes from a selfish source. They sat in silence for a moment, processing Richard's final words. Around them, the conference room was empty now except for the cleaning crew setting up chairs for tomorrow's support group meetings. Do we share this? Maya asked. With the media, the foundation, the other women? Danielle considered the question carefully. We share the parts that help other people. We keep the parts that are just about him. Which parts help other people? The part about recognizing the warning signs. The part about how controlling behavior comes from fear, not strength. The part about how love requires vulnerability, and some people would rather destroy relationships than risk being hurt. Maya nodded. We can use this. Turn his confession into education. One more thing, Danielle said, folding the letter carefully. From now on, when people ask us about Richard, we tell them the truth. Not to shame him. Shaming the dead changes nothing. But to help the living recognize these patterns before they destroy their own lives. As they left the foundation that evening, Danielle felt a completeness she'd never experienced before. Richard's death hadn't brought closure. His life had taught her that closure was something you created for yourself, not something other people could give you. But his death had brought clarity about what she wanted to build, about the family she'd chosen, about the difference between surviving and thriving. The foundation would expand. More women would find their voices. More men would learn to choose vulnerability over control. And Richard Cole would be remembered not as a powerful man who made mistakes, but as a cautionary tale about the cost of choosing fear over love. That was justice enough. She began as a woman who lost everything and ended as one who built a legacy from the ruins, proving that silence broken becomes the loudest thunder. 2 years later, Danielle stood on the steps of the United States Capitol, watching Maya deliver testimony to the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on Family Law Reform. The Colbrooks Foundation had grown into a national organization with chapters in 37 states. The legislation they'd helped draft, the Financial Abuse Prevention Act, was 3 votes away from becoming federal law. Mrs. Cole, a reporter approached with a microphone. Can you tell us how you feel about your foundation's impact reaching this level? Danielle smiled, no longer startled by media attention or uncomfortable with public speaking. I feel proud that women who are suffering in silence right now will soon have legal protections that didn't exist when I needed them. Every woman deserves the right to financial independence and legal representation, regardless of what her abuser can afford. Through the committee room's glass doors, she could see Maya at the witness table, fielding questions from senators with the same calm authority she'd brought to Richard's prosecution. Some of the questions were hostile. Several senators clearly saw the legislation as government overreach. But Maya answered each one with facts, statistics, and personal stories that cut through political posturing. Senator Williams, Maya was saying, respectfully, requiring separate financial disclosures in divorce proceedings isn't about punishing successful spouses. It's about ensuring that marriage doesn't become a trap for economically vulnerable partners. Danielle's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, watching on C-SPAN. She's destroying their arguments. Dinner celebration tonight. She typed back, yes. Maya's choice of restaurant. She earned it. Their relationship had evolved into something Danielle once thought impossible, a partnership between equals. Marcus supported her work without trying to control it. He celebrated her successes without taking credit for them. When she traveled for foundation business, he missed her but trusted her. When she needed space to process difficult cases, he gave it without sulking. 3 months ago, he proposed in the foundation's original conference room, the same space where she'd first met Maya. The ring was simple, ethically sourced, and purchased with money from his own account. Not a joint one. Not a surprise that would leave her feeling ambushed, but a choice they'd discussed and decided on together. We don't have to have a big wedding, he'd said. We don't have to do anything traditional. We just have to choose each other every day as equals. The wedding was scheduled for next month. A small ceremony in Maya's backyard, officiated by the judge who had presided over Richard's sentencing. The guest list included foundation staff, Maya's adoptive parents, Marcus's family, and 23 women who had found freedom through their work together. Danielle, Maya's voice called from the committee room doorway. The hearing had ended while she was lost in thought. We need to talk. Outside, they walked to a quiet spot on the Capitol lawn, away from reporters and lobbyists. Maya's expression was serious but not grim, the look she wore when processing important information. Three of the hostile senators pulled me aside after the hearing. Maya began. They want to make a deal. What kind of deal? Full federal funding for family law legal aid programs. Expansion of domestic violence prevention initiatives. National database for tracking financial abuse cases. Maya paused. In exchange for removing the mandatory financial disclosure requirements from our bill. Danielle considered this carefully. The financial disclosure requirement was the heart of their legislation, the provision that would prevent abusers from hiding assets during divorce proceedings. But the other elements would help thousands of women who couldn't afford attorneys. What do you think? Danielle asked. I think we take the deal, Maya said. Not because it's perfect, but because perfect is the enemy of good. We can fight for financial disclosure requirements at the state level while helping women with the federal programs. You're right. Danielle felt the familiar mixture of compromise and progress that had defined their work. Besides, this isn't the end of our fight. It's just the next phase. They walked back toward the Capitol building, passing tourists taking pictures and school groups learning about democracy in action. Danielle thought about how different her life looked now compared to 2 years ago. Then, she'd been afraid to spend money without permission. Now, she was helping craft federal legislation. Maya, she said as they reached the building entrance. Do you ever miss it? The simplicity of just being angry. Maya laughed. You mean compared to the complexity of actually solving problems? Exactly. Sometimes, Maya admitted, anger is clean. It doesn't require compromise or patience or working with people you disagree with. But anger without action is just noise. And we've never been content with making noise. That evening, the Foundation's core team gathered at Maya's favorite Ethiopian restaurant to celebrate the day's progress. The conversation flowed between shop talk and personal updates, the comfortable rhythm of people who had become family through shared purpose. To the Colbrooks Foundation, Maya raised her glass. For proving that the most powerful love doesn't rescue you from your life. It recognizes the strength that was always there. To sisterhood, Danielle added, clinking her glass against Maya's. For finding each other when we needed it most. To all the women who refused to stay silent, added Jessica, the young woman who had found her courage in their offices and now worked as their volunteer coordinator. The toast continued around the table, each person adding their voice to the celebration. But Danielle found herself thinking beyond this moment, beyond this room, to all the women who would benefit from the work they'd done today. Her phone buzzed with messages, updates from Foundation chapters across the country, interview requests from podcasters and journalists, invitations to speak at universities and conferences. The quiet housewife who had once been afraid to question a credit card statement was now a nationally recognized advocate. What are you thinking about? Marcus asked, sliding into the seat next to her. I'm thinking about silence, she said. How I used to think it was about keeping peace. Now I know it was about keeping fear. And now I know that the storm after silence is the most powerful weather pattern in the world. It changes everything it touches. Later that night, Danielle sat in her study, the room that had once been Richard's home office, now transformed into her writing space. The Foundation's annual report was due next week, and she wanted to capture not just their statistics, but their story. She opened her laptop and began to type. This year, the Colbrooks Foundation helped 2,847 women escape financial abuse. We provided legal representation to 1,203 women who couldn't afford attorneys. We assisted in recovering over $47 million in hidden assets. We helped pass legislation in 12 states requiring financial disclosure in divorce proceedings. But numbers don't tell the whole story. The real story is in the phone calls we receive at midnight from women who found the courage to leave. It's in the emails from daughters thanking us for helping their mothers find their voices. It's in the men who contact us asking how to support their partners better, how to recognize controlling behavior in themselves before it destroys their families. The real story is that silence is not golden. Silence is expensive. It costs dreams, dignity, and decades of life. But when silence breaks, it creates space for truth. And truth, once spoken, cannot be unspoken. 2 years ago, I thought my life was ending. I had lost my home, my security, my sense of self. I had been betrayed by the person I trusted most. I felt powerless, voiceless, and alone. Today, I understand that those feelings were not the end of my story. They were the beginning of my real life. The storm after silence is not destruction. It's reconstruction. It's the sound of women finding their voices, their strength, their power. It's the sound of systems changing, laws evolving, and future generations growing up in a world where financial abuse is recognized as the crime it has always been. To every woman reading this who feels trapped, voiceless, or afraid, your silence is not protecting anyone. Your voice is not too small to matter. Your story is not too common to count. Break the silence. Face the storm. Build something beautiful from whatever remains. The most powerful love doesn't rescue you from your life. It recognizes the strength that was always there. Danielle saved the document and closed her laptop. Outside her window, Atlantis sparkled in the darkness. Millions of lights representing millions of stories. Some of those stories were ending in silence and fear. But more and more were beginning with courage and hope. Her phone rang. Maya calling from her own apartment across town. "I couldn't sleep," Maya said without preamble. "I keep thinking about the women who will benefit from today's vote. About the ones we haven't met, yet who are planning to leave tomorrow, next week, next year." "Me too," Danielle admitted. "Sometimes I wonder what our mother would think about all this. About us finding each other, about the work we're doing. I think she'd be proud," Maya said softly. "I think she'd say we turned her greatest sacrifice into something meaningful." "Maya, yeah. What do you want our legacy to be? When we're gone, when the foundation outlives us, what do you want people to remember?" Maya was quiet for a moment, considering. "I want them to remember that two women who had every reason to stay broken chose to heal together. I want them to remember that we proved sisterhood is stronger than betrayal, that chosen family is stronger than blood, and that the most powerful response to being silenced is to amplify other voices." "That's perfect," Danielle said. "That's exactly right." After they hung up, Danielle walked through her house, the home she had fought to keep and transformed into something entirely her own. In the living room, photos from foundation events covered one wall. Women graduating from their financial literacy program, attorneys celebrating successful cases, Maya receiving a civil rights award, Marcus and Danielle at the Capitol steps after the hearing. But her favorite photo sat on her bedside table, a candid shot from last year's foundation retreat. She and Maya were laughing at something off camera, their faces bright with joy and purpose. Two sisters who had found each other in the storm and chosen to build something beautiful together. The storm after silence had been fiercer than she'd imagined, but it had also been more transformative, more powerful, and more healing than she'd dared to hope. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new women to help, new battles to fight. But tonight, Danielle fell asleep in her own bed, in her own home, surrounded by the life she had chosen rather than the one she had endured. The silence was broken. The storm had passed. And in its wake, thousands of women were learning that their voices could change the world.